My hands trembled as I clutched the edge of the kitchen sink, knuckles white, struggling to breathe through the sobs that racked my body. The sound of the front door slamming echoed through the empty house, a final punctuation to the look of utter betrayal in Michael's eyes. How had I let things go this far? In the span of a few reckless months, I had torn apart the family I loved, leaving nothing but shattered trust and broken hearts in my wake. My name is Sarah, and this is the story of how I nearly destroyed everything I held dear. It was a Tuesday evening when I first realized how bad things had gotten between my husband Michael and me. I remember because it was Tucker night, and I'd spent an hour in the kitchen preparing Michael's favorite meal. The kids, Emily and Liam, were at my mum's for the week, so I thought we could have a nice, quiet dinner together. Maybe even talk like we used to. I heard the garage door open at 8:20 p.m., a full hour later than Michael usually got home. The sound of his keys hitting the bowl by the door echoed through the house, followed by his heavy footsteps. "Michael?" I called out, trying to keep my voice light. "Dinner's ready." He appeared in the doorway, his tie loose around his neck, dark circles under his eyes. "Hey," he mumbled, barely looking at me. "Sorry, I'm not hungry. Had a sandwich at the office." My heart sank. "Oh," I said, trying to hide my disappointment. "But it's Tucker night, your favorite." He glanced at the spread on the table, a flicker of guilt crossing his face. "I'm sorry, Sarah. I've got a big presentation tomorrow. I need to prep." And just like that he was gone, disappearing into his home office. I stood there, surrounded by cooking taco shells and congealing cheese, feeling more alone than I had in years. This wasn't the Michael I married. The Michael I fell in love with would have swept me in his arms, kissed me deeply, and told me how much he appreciated me. But Michael had been fading away for months now, ever since he got that big promotion at his job as a financial analyst. I sank into a chair at the table, picking at the food I'd so carefully prepared. How had we gotten here? When did we stop talking, really talking? When did I become nothing more than a ghost in my own home? As I sat there, I couldn't help but think back to the early days of our relationship. We met in college. He was a charming business major, and I was a quiet art student. Opposites attract, right? God, we were so in love back then. Every moment felt electric. Every touch sent shivers down my spine. We'd stay up all night just talking, dreaming about our future together. Now, 10 years and 2 kids later, those dreams seem so far away. Don't get me wrong, I loved our life. I loved our children more than anything in this world. But somewhere along the way, Michael and I had lost each other. I cleaned up dinner, wrapping the leftovers and storing them in the fridge. As I worked, I could hear the faint sound of Michael's voice from his office. He was probably on a call with his team, preparing for whatever big deal they were working on. I used to love listening to him talk about his work, his passion for it. Now it just felt like a wall between us. That night I lay in bed alone, staring at the ceiling. Michael didn't come to bed until well past midnight, and even then he just collapsed onto his side without a word. I wanted to reach out, to touch him, to bridge this growing chasm between us. But I didn't. I was afraid he'd pull away, and I didn't think I could bear that rejection. The next morning I worked on an empty bed. Michael had already left for work. There was a note on the kitchen counter. "Big day today. Don't wait up." 5 words. That's all I got. As I sipped my coffee, I couldn't shake the feeling that something had to change. I couldn't keep living like this, feeling like a stranger in my own marriage. But what could I do? I loved Michael, I really did. But love wasn't enough if he wasn't there to receive it. Little did I know change was coming. And it would arrive in the form of my new boss, James Parker. I'd been working part-time at a local marketing firm for the past year, mostly to keep myself busy while the kids were at school. It wasn't anything groundbreaking, but I enjoyed the work and the chance to use my creativity. James had just taken over as the new creative director, and from the moment he walked into the office, everything changed. He was tall, with salt and pepper hair, and the kind of smile that made you feel like you were the only person in the room. And when he looked at me, really looked at me, I felt seen for the first time in months. "Sarah, right?" he said, stopping by my desk. "I've been looking at your work. You've got a real eye for design." I felt myself blushing. "I'll thank you. I'm still learning, really." He leaned against my desk, his cologne subtle but intoxicating. Don't sell yourself short. I think you've got real potential. How would you feel about taking on more responsibility? I've got a big project coming up and I could use someone with your talents. My heart raced. Was this really happening? I love to. I stammered. Thank you for the opportunity. James smiled and I swear the whole room lit up. Excellent. We'll be working closely together on this one. I'm looking forward to it. As he walked away, I couldn't help but watch him go. For the first time in a long time, I felt a spark of excitement, a possibility of being valued. I should have known then that I was playing with fire. But when you've been cold for so long, even the smallest flame feels like salvation. That night, as I lay in bed next to Michael's sleeping form, I couldn't stop thinking about James, about the way he looked at me, the way he valued my work. I told myself it was just professional admiration, nothing more. But deep down I knew I was lying to myself. And that was just the beginning. Over the next few weeks, James and I spent more and more time together. Late nights at the office, working on the big project. Coffee runs that turned into long conversations about art, life, and our dreams. He listened to me in a way Michael hadn't in years. He made me laugh, made me feel alive again. One night, we were the last two left in the office. I was hunched over my computer, trying to perfect a design that just wasn't cooperating. Sarah, James said softly, placing a hand on my shoulder. It's late, you should go home. I looked up at him, suddenly aware of how close he was. I want to get this right, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. He smiled, that smile that made my heart skip a beat. You're too hard on yourself. It's perfect just like you. Before I could react, he leaned down and kissed me. It was soft, tentative at first, but then deepened into something more. Something dangerous, something I knew I shouldn't want but couldn't resist. When we finally broke apart, I was breathless, guilty, exhilarated, terrified. I should go. I stammered, grabbing my things and practically running out of the office. As I drove home, my lips still tingling from James' kiss, I felt a storm of emotions. Guilt, yes, so much guilt, but also a thrill I hadn't felt in years. A part of me that I thought had died long ago has suddenly sparked back to life. I pulled into our driveway, my hands shaking as I turned off the engine. Through the window, I could see Michael in his usual spot on the couch, illuminated by the glow of the TV. He didn't even look up as I came in. Hey, I said, my voice trembling slightly. Sorry I'm late. He grunted in response, eyes still glued to the screen. There's leftover pizza in the fridge if you're hungry. I stood there for a moment, waiting for something. A question about my day maybe, or a kiss hello. Anything to show that he noticed me, that he cared. But there was nothing. As I lay in bed that night, my mind raced. What had I done? What was I doing? I loved Michael, I really did. But James made me feel alive again, desired, valued. I told myself it was just a kiss, that it wouldn't happen again, that I could control this. But deep down I knew, this was just the beginning of a storm that would tear my life apart. And God helped me, a part of me couldn't wait to be swept away. The next morning, I woke up feeling like I was living in two different worlds. There was a familiar world in my home, my marriage, my life with Michael. And then there was this new, exciting, dangerous world that had opened up with James. I went through the motions of my morning routine, making breakfast for the kids, packing their lunches, all while my mind was elsewhere. The guilt was there, a constant knot in my stomach. But so was the thrill of anticipation. What would happen when I saw James today? As I dropped the kids off at school, my daughter Emily gave me a strange look. Mom, are you okay? You seem different. For a moment I panicked. Was it that obvious? Could an 8-year-old see the turmoil inside me? I'm fine, sweetie, I said, forcing a smile. Just a little tired. Have a great day at school. I watched her skip into the building, her backpack bouncing with each step, and felt a fresh wave of guilt wash over me. What was I doing? How could I risk everything, my family, my marriage, for what? A few stolen moments of excitement. But as I pulled into the office parking lot and saw James' car, my heart started racing again. This push and pull between guilt and desire was tearing me apart, and we'd only shared one kiss. I took a deep breath, straightened my blouse and walked into the office. James was already there, leaning against my desk with 2 cups of coffee in his hands. "Good morning, Sarah," he said, his voice low and intimate. He handed me one of the coffees. "Just how you like it. Extra shot, splash of almond milk." The fact that he remembered how I took my coffee shouldn't have affected me so much, but it did. When was the last time Michael had done something so thoughtful? "Thank you," I murmured, taking a sip to hide my flushed cheeks. "About last night." James held up a hand, his expression serious. "Sarah, I want you to know that I respect you, both as a colleague and as a person. What happened last night? I won't pretend I didn't want it, but if you tell me it can't happen again, I'll understand." I stood there, coffee warming my hands, staring into his eyes. This was my chance to put a stop to this, to recommit to my marriage, to be the person I've always thought I was. But the words wouldn't come. Instead, I found myself saying maybe we should talk about this somewhere more private. James nodded, a small smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "My office, lunch break." I nodded, already feeling my pulse quicken at the thought. The morning crawled by. I tried to focus on my work, but my mind kept drifting to James, to the kiss we'd shared, to what might happen during our lunch talk. When lunchtime finally rolled around, I felt like I was walking to the gallows and flying all at once. I knocked softly on James' office door. "Come in," he called. I stepped inside, closing the door behind me. James was standing by the window, backlit by the midday sun. He looked gorgeous. There was no other word for it. "Sarah," he said, his voice soft. "I'm glad you came." "James, I started, but the words caught in my throat. What could I say? That I was married. He knew that. That this was wrong. We both knew that too. He crossed the room in 2 long strides, standing so close I could feel the heat radiating from his body. "Tell me to stop," he whispered. "Tell me you don't want this and I'll never mention it again." I should have said it. I should have pushed him away, run out of that office and never looked back. But instead I found myself reaching up, pulling him down to me, and kissing him with all the pent-up passion and frustration of the past few months. It was like a dam breaking. Suddenly we were all hands and lips and breathless eyes. He lifted me onto his desk, scattering papers to the floor. I should have been mortified. Anyone could walk in. This was so unprofessional. But I couldn't bring myself to care. For those few stolen moments, I wasn't Sarah the neglected wife or Sarah the worried mother. I was just Sarah, a woman desired and wanted. When it was over, the reality of what we'd done came crashing down on me. I straightened my clothes with shaking hands, unable to meet James' eyes. "Sarah," he said softly, reaching for me. "Are you okay?" I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. What had I done? How could I face Michael after this? How could I face myself? "This can't happen again," I said, finally looking up at him. "I'm married. I have children. This was a mistake." James nodded, his expression unreadable. "If that's what you want, Sarah. But I want you to know this wasn't just physical for me. I care about you deeply." I felt tears prick at the corners of my eyes. "Please don't say that. I can't. I can't hear that right now." I fled his office, barely making it to the bathroom before the tears started falling. What kind of person was I? How could I have done this to Michael, to our family? But even as I berated myself, I couldn't forget the way James had made me feel. Alive, desired, seen. That night, as I lay next to Michael in our bed, I felt like there was an ocean between us. He was snoring softly, oblivious to the turmoil in my heart. I wanted to wake him up, to confess everything, to beg for forgiveness. But I was too much of a coward. Instead, I stared at the ceiling, replaying the events of the day in my mind. The guilt was overwhelming, but so was the memory of James's touch, his words, the way he looked at me. I knew in that moment that despite my words to James, this wasn't over. Not by a long shot. And that terrified me more than anything. The next few weeks were a blur of guilt, desire, and self-loathing. I tried to resist James, I really did. But every time I resolved to end things, he'd do something. bring me coffee just the way I liked it, praise my work in front of the whole team, or simply give me that look that made me feel like the most beautiful woman in the world, and my resolve would crumble. Our affair, if you could call it that, continued in stolen moments. Hushed conversations in the supply closet, lingering touches as we passed in the hallway, and yes, more encounters in his office during lunch breaks. Each time I swore it would be the last. Each time I went back for more. At home, things with Michael weren't getting any better. If anything, they were worse. He was working longer hours than ever, and when he was home, he was distant and distracted. I tried to reconnect with him, to rekindle some of what we'd lost, but it felt like trying to light a fire with matches. One night, about a month into my whatever it was with James, Michael and I had a rare moment alone. The kids were in bed and we were sitting on the couch, the TV droning in the background. "Michael?" I said, turning to face him. "Can we talk?" He looked at me, surprised flickering across his face. "Sure, what's up?" I took a deep breath. This was my chance. I could tell him everything, beg for forgiveness, trying to save our marriage. But as I had opened my mouth, the words wouldn't come. Instead, I heard myself say, "I miss you. We barely talk anymore. I feel like we're drifting apart." Michael sighed, running a hand through his hair. "I know, Sarah. I'm sorry. Work's just been crazy lately. This new position, it's a lot of pressure." "I understand that," I said, trying to keep the frustration out of my voice. "But we're supposed to be partners. I feel like I'm losing you." He reached out, taking my hand in his. It was the first time he touched me in weeks. It wasn't just a perfunctory kiss goodbye. "You're not losing me, Sarah. I'm right here. It's a phase. It'll get better, I promise." I wanted to believe him. God, how I wanted to believe him. But as I looked into his eyes, all I could see was James. James, who made me feel alive. James, who saw me, really saw me. "Okay," I said softly, squeezing his hand. "I hope so." We went to bed after that. And for the first time in ages, Michael held me. As I lay there in Michael's arms, I should have felt comforted. Instead, I felt like a fraud. Here was my husband, the man I promised to love and cherish, holding me close. And all I could think about was another man. The next day at work, I tried to avoid James. I threw myself into my projects, keeping my head down and my door closed. But around lunchtime, there was a soft knock. "Come in." I called, already knowing who it would be. James stepped inside, closing the door behind him. "Sarah," he said softly. "Are you okay? You've been avoiding me." I couldn't see his eyes. "I talked to Michael last night," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "James is different." "Oh, and what did you tell him?" "Nothing." I admitted. Shame was washing over me. I couldn't. I tried. But I just couldn't do it. He crossed the room, kneeling beside my chair. "Sarah, look at me." Reluctantly, I raised my eyes to meet him. The concern I saw there nearly broke me. "I know this is hard for you," he said. "I know you're torn. But I need you to know something." He took a deep breath. "I'm falling in love with you, Sarah. And I think he might be falling for me too." His words hit me like a physical blow. Love? Was that what this was? The thrill, the excitement, the way he made me feel seen and valued. Was that love? "James," I started, but he pressed a finger to my lips. "You don't have to say anything right now," he said. "I just needed you to know. Whatever you decide, whatever happens next, I'm here for as long as you want me." He leaned in, kissing me softly. And then he was gone, leaving me alone with my thoughts and my guilt. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of emotion. I was living two lives, the dutiful wife and mother at home, and the woman in the throes of a passionate affair at work. The guilt was eating me alive, but I couldn't seem to stop. James was everything Michael wasn't right now. He was attentive, passionate, he made me feel beautiful and valued. But every time I looked at my children, every time Michael absent-mindedly kissed me goodbye in the morning, I felt like the worst person in the world. Things came to a head at the company's annual summer party. It was a big event, held at a swanky hotel downtown. Spouses were invited, which meant Michael would be there. The thought of him and James in the same room made me sick with anxiety. I spent hours getting ready, trying to look perfect. For who? I wasn't sure anymore. When Michael saw me, he gave a low whistle. Wow, Sarah, he said, his eyes roaming over me appreciatively. You look amazing. For a moment, I felt a spark of hope. Maybe tonight would be different. Maybe we could reconnect. But as soon as we arrived at the party, Michael was pulled away by some colleagues, leaving me alone by the bar. That's where James found me. You look stunning, he murmured, his eyes dark with desire. I wish I could kiss you right now. I felt myself blushing. James, please. Michael's here. He nodded, his jaw tightening. I know. I saw him earlier talking to the CEO. Seems like he's quite the rising star. There was an edge to his voice that I'd never heard before. Before I could respond, Michael appeared at my side. Sarah, there you are, he said, wrapping an arm around my waist. I see you've met James. He's been doing great things in the marketing department. James plastered on a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. Thank you, Michael. Your wife has been an invaluable asset to our team. I stood there, trapped between the two men, feeling like I might spontaneously combust from the tension. As the night wore on, I watched James drink more and more. His eyes followed me everywhere I went, growing darker and more intense with each glass. Michael, for his part, was actually being attentive for once, keeping his arm around me, introducing me to his colleagues. It should have made me happy. This was what I wanted, wasn't it? Michael paid attention to me, being proud of me. But all I could think about was James, and the hurt in his eyes every time he saw Michael touch me. Everything fell apart when James took the stage to give a speech. He was clearly drunk, his words slightly slurred. I want to thank everyone for coming tonight, it began. Especially those of you who actually make time for your spouses. There was an uncomfortable murmur through the crowd. I felt Michael stiffen beside me. James continued, his eyes locked on Michael. You know, it's funny. Some men have these beautiful, talented wives at home, and they don't even see them. They're too busy climbing the corporate ladder, too busy for date nights or conversations or, well, anything really. What the hell is he talking about? Michael muttered. I couldn't breathe. This couldn't be happening. But hey, their loss is another man's gain, right? James said with a bitter laugh. Because let me tell you, when you neglect a woman like that, someone else will be there to pick up the pieces. Michael's arm dropped from around me. I could feel him staring at me, but I couldn't meet his eyes. All right, that's enough, someone said, gently leading James off the stage. The room erupted into awkward chatter, everyone pretending they hadn't just witnessed what they had. I finally forced myself to look at Michael. His face was a mask of confusion and dawning realization. Sarah, he said, his voice low and dangerous. What the fuck was that about? Before I could answer, James appeared beside us, swaying slightly. Michael, my man, he slurred. How's it feel to be married to the most beautiful woman in the room and not even notice her? What happened next seemed to unfold in slow motion. Michael's face contorted with rage. His fist connected with James's jaw with a sickening crack. James stumbled backward, but Michael followed, hitting him again and again. People were shouting, trying to pull Michael off James, but he was like a man possessed. When they finally separated them, James was on the floor, his face bloody. Michael stood over him, chest heaving, his knuckles split and bleeding. The room was silent, everyone staring at us. I felt like I was going to be sick. We're leaving, Michael growled, grabbing my arm and practically dragging me out of the hotel. The car ride home was silent. Michael's hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles were white. I wanted to say something, anything, but the words wouldn't come. When we got home, Michael went straight to the guest room, slamming the door behind him. I stood in the hallway, listening to the sound of him throwing things, muffled curses coming through the door. I sank to the floor, my back against the wall, and finally let the tears come. What had I done? How had I let things get so out of control? As I sat there, sobbing in my beautiful dress, I realized that my life as I knew it was over. The question was what would be left when the dust settled. The next few days were a blur of silence and tension. Michael refused to speak to me, sleeping in the guest room and leaving for work before I woke up. The kids could sense something was wrong, tiptoeing around us like we were bombs about to explode. I called in sick to work, unable to face James at the fallout from the party. My phone was flooded with messages and missed calls from him, but I couldn't bring myself to respond. What could I possibly say? On the third day of this agonizing silence, I couldn't take it anymore. I waited until Michael came home, cornering him in the kitchen. "We need to talk," I said, my voice shaking. Michael looked at me, and the pain and betrayal in his eyes nearly broke me. "Talk about what, Sarah?" "About how you've been fucking your boss. About how you made me look like an idiot in front of everyone I work with." I flinched at his words, but I knew I deserved them. "I'm sorry," I whispered. "I'm so sorry." He laughed, a harsh, bitter sound. "Sorry? You're sorry? You have any idea what you've done? To me? To our family?" Tears were streaming down my face now. I know I've ruined everything. But please, Michael, please let me explain." "Explain what?" His spat. "How you could throw away 10 years of marriage. How you could betray me like this." I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. "I was lonely, Michael. You were never here, and when you were, it was like you didn't even see me anymore. I felt invisible, unappreciated. James, he made me feel seen." Michael's face contorted with anger and pain. "So this is my fault? Because I was working hard to provide for our family." "No," I cried. "No, it's not your fault. It's mine. I made a terrible, unforgivable mistake." "But Michael, our marriage was in trouble long before James came along. We stopped talking, stopped connecting. Can you honestly say you were happy?" He was quiet for a long moment, and I saw the fight go out of him. He slumped against the counter, suddenly looking old and tired. "No," he admitted quietly. "I wasn't happy. But I never imagined you'd do this." We stood there in silence, the weight of our broken marriage hanging between us. Finally, Michael spoke again. "I don't know if I can ever forgive you for this, Sarah. I don't know if I can ever trust you again." His words hit me like a blow, but I knew I deserved them. "I understand," I said softly. "But I want to try, Michael. If you'll let me, I want to try to fix this. To fix us." He looked at me for a long moment, his eyes searching my face. "I don't know if there's anything left to fix," he said finally. "I need time, space. I can't look at you right now without seeing you with him." I nodded, fresh tears spilling down my cheeks. "Okay, whatever you need. I'll be here, Michael. When you're ready to talk, to try, I'll be here." He nodded once, then left the kitchen. A few minutes later, I heard the front door close. He was gone again, and I was alone with the wreckage of my choices. As I sank to the kitchen floor, sobs racking my body, I realized the full magnitude of what I'd done. I'd betrayed my husband, jeopardized my children's stability, and for what? A few moments of feeling desired, the excitement of freedom.